I'd just like to start with the acknowledgement of land. So we acknowledge that the land we meet on is the traditional lands of the Kaurna people, and we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. We acknowledge the Kaurna people as the traditional custodians of the Greater Adelaide region, and that their cultural beliefs remain important to the Kaurna people today. So to officially begin the session, I'd just like to welcome all of you today. My name's Isabella and I am the Carer Educational Officer at Connecting Foster and Kinship Carers. And here with me today we have Eamonn, if you could give us a wave, and Janice, give us a wave. Janice, sorry, Janice. And they are both from Samesh. So I'm going to pass it on to them to start off the session, and then I'm going to go into a little bit of a Q&A as well. So I'll pass it over to you guys.
Yep. Thank you, everyone. As Isabella said, my name's Eamonn. Janice and I just thought we'd quickly introduce ourselves, just so you know who we are, what we do, and why Isabella has asked us to do this presentation. So we work for the program called CMESH, which is a joint program between CF&KC-SA and Swan Harbour Health. We work predominantly with gay men who have sex with men, and people living with HIV, but we often do a lot of LGBT advocacy work and work with the broader LGBT community as well. And Janice and I are specifically tasked with presenting LGBT foundations training to organisations and individuals who want to learn more about LGBT communities and how they can be more inclusive, how they can become better allies, and just improve their knowledge and build on the knowledge that they may already have. So some of you may know some of the information that we sort of start off talking about, and some of you may be very new. So if you do know a lot, sort of bear with us while we go through some of the more foundation stuff as we explain what LGBTIQ+ means, and then we'll move on to the questions as well. I'll just let Janice introduce herself as well.
Okay. Hi everyone, as Eamonn said, my name is Janice. I've been working in sexual health, particularly with HIV and LGBTIQ issues for almost 20 years now. I do education, I do some social media, and I do some current awareness work because I'm also a librarian. So that's me.
And we'd just like to highlight that we're not specifically sort of engaged in child behaviour experts or as a psychiatrist or anything like that. We're purely allies and advocates for the community, as I said before. So any sort of specific questions around sort of behaviour management or something like that, we may sort of refer you to other services and people or resources that can potentially provide you with more information. And Janice and I are compiling a list of resources in a Word document that we'll send to Isabella that can be sent around to everybody and shared as well.
For referrals, yeah, referral document.
Other avenues of support if anybody does need it. And in saying that, we'd just like to sort of acknowledge that at the time of this recording and while we're speaking to everybody here, that the information is sort of up to date and relevant for today, for June 2020, but it may change over time. Even the language and the terminology that we use can change. So it's really important that we just acknowledge that over time things can change, and what's relevant now may not necessarily be relevant next year or 2 years or 5 years time. So it's all about having that ongoing sort of education and keeping up to date with new information, sort of, which is what Janice and I try and do on a regular basis with this training. We sort of try to listen to the community and hear back from them about what's happening in the community and what's relevant for them in the way that we discuss LGBT issues in a respectful way that's inclusive, and we always try to do that to the best of our abilities. Did anybody have any questions at all for us before we sort of went into anything? just about what we do or anything like that? Or would you like us to just sort of get started?
Yeah, everyone's got thumbs up. Perfect.
So Janice and I thought it might be important to break down what LGBTIQ plus means, because you'll often hear it thrown around a lot. It can become a bit of a mouthful to say. It's sort of said a lot, but sometimes breaking it down can be quite confronting. It can be quite confusing because there's lots of words to remember, and you can end up going into lots of different avenues of research. So when we're discussing that acronym, we're talking about lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, and queer people. And the plus is sort of for everybody else that may identify within the community and be included in that community. And it's really important, you know, we say all these words, but they also have unique experiences within the community and different needs. So if we're talking about lesbian, gay, and bisexual people, we're actually talking about sexual orientation or who somebody's attracted to. If we're talking about transgender people, we're talking about gender identity, so that understanding and knowledge of our gender that we have, which will be different or may feel different for somebody who is transgender from the sex they were assigned at birth. And Janice can jump in at any time and also correct me if I use the wrong terminology. And when we're talking about intersex people, we're talking about the physical characteristics that make up our bodies. So things like our chromosomes and our reproductive organs and genitalia and things like that.
Yep. And hormones are the other thing. Yeah.
And when we're talking about queer people, we know that historically this was used as a slur, but it's sort of been reclaimed by the community, especially by a lot of young people. Even for myself, it was a very difficult word to sort of get used to hearing. I grew up sort of in the early 2000s. I was a teenager in the early 2000s. And for me, that was still a slur and something that was used derogatory to sort of bully and degrade LGBT people. So even for me, coming to terms with that word was quite difficult. And I know lots of other LGBT people may have similar experiences, and people who are friends or allies of LGBT people may have the same feelings about that word. But it's just important to know that lots of young people do use that word to describe their identity. And it can have lots of different meanings and lots of different ways in which it's used.
And can I just throw in here about just that idea of reclaiming words? So it's one of that notion that a word that has been used against you in the past, you take back the power by using it for yourself. So it's that thing of we'll call ourselves queer, and that's where that's kind of come from. But as Eamonn kind of alluded, it's a bit of a generational thing, because there's a lot of young people that are really happy to be called queer, I guess because it's a very catch-all term. It kind of covers anyone else in the community without having to be more specific. But there are definitely older people who do struggle with it. So we do tend to suggest it's up to the individual. But because you mainly we're talking about young people, it's a fairly safe thing now. There are quite a few services in Adelaide for young LGBTIQ people which have queer in the title. There's the, and these will be in that document we're going to send around. There's the East Queer Youth Drop-In, there's the Southern Queer Youth, there's a whole lot of young people's things with the word queer in them. So usually you're fairly safe in using it with young people. Anyway, Eamonn, do you want to continue with what you were saying there?
Yeah, I was about to say, I was also going to say that it's really important to remember that when we're discussing the LGBTIQ plus community, you may hear people say the queer community, the rainbow community, the LGBT community, the gay community, and oftentimes when they use one of those sorts of words, they're talking about the community as a whole, unless they specifically say we're talking about gay men or same-sex women, or we're talking about transgender groups or intersex people in a particular setting. So there's lots of different ways that we can talk about the LGBTIQ plus community, because as you can imagine, if, for example, Janice and I had to say LGBTIQ plus over and over again, we'll get tired very quickly.
It keeps getting longer. It keeps getting longer. So, you know, it's just, and you know, one really important concept to be aware of is that language evolves all the time. And we get a lot of questions of people saying, oh, can you just give us a list of the right words to use? But we can't. A, because there's no kind of central authority, and B, because it keeps evolving. And the right word to use now might be out 6 months later, you know. But we can give sort of general guidance around that. And now I've lost my track of where I was coming from. What did you just say, Eamonn? That made me go off on this tangent about language.
I'm not sure. It was just
you're as bad as I am.
And how we use different words to describe the community as a whole.
Yeah, I was just going to say there's no kind of, yeah, it just kind of highlights that, I guess, that different people have different ideas. A lot of people don't like labels, which is fine, but for practicality's sake, we need to, I know what I was going to say, but for practicality's sake, we do need to use them, because how do we tell certain people that we have services for them or whatever without using labels? So, but I was just going to say one illustration is at Shine SA, we have a queer staff network, and we have changed our name several times. It was the GLBT staff network, then it was the LGBTI staff network, then it was the LGBTIQ, and this is getting absolutely ridiculous. So we just now call it the Rainbow Staff Network, because that way it's just a catchy term that we don't have to keep rearranging the acronym all the time for practicality's sake. So, you know, often people will say queer or rainbow or something like that, just to avoid the kerfuffle of dealing with the acronym. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah. And also when we're talking about this community, it's really important to remember that sexual orientation isn't the same as gender identity, and gender identity isn't the same as sexual orientation. So somebody could be transgender but still identify as straight. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to have a very broad sexual identity either. Just in the same way that I'm gay, but I identify as male, my sexual orientation does not dictate how I perceive my gender. It's a completely different concept. So it's just really important to remember not to get sort of gender sort of tied into sexual orientation, because it is a very different matter and a very different concept that requires different care needs, different kinds of conversations, and different kinds of support networks as well. We'll talk about more of that through the questions that were asked. Isabella kindly sent them through to us. They were de-identified, so we don't know who asked which question. But we'll talk about more of that sort of inclusive stuff and support services through those questions, rather than just trying to bombard you with lots of information and overwhelming. Yeah. We understand that it can be quite a lot to take all at once. So hopefully sort of doing it this way will be a bit more constructive.
Can I just jump in again? I think you made a really important point, Eamonn, particularly in talking about young people, not to confuse sexual orientation, i.e. who you're attracted to, what gender or genders you're attracted to, with gender identity, which is about what your gender is, how you see your own gender. And it's really important with young people, because often when we try and have conversations around young people's gender identity, people say, or there's a drag queen story time at the library or what have you, people will say, oh, we shouldn't sexualize children. And we say, we're not sexualizing children. Gender is nothing to do with sex. Everyone has a gender. Even babies, even tiny children have a gender. Are they a boy or a girl or something else? Literally everyone in the world knows what gender they are, and it's nothing to do with having sex, what gender you are. So it's really, really important that that we don't confuse with someone's gender identity with being sexual, because saying that we're trying to sexualize children just simply isn't true. And it's a way of really shutting down that conversation and frightening people, I think. So yeah, that's important point, Eamonn. Also, I just want to apologise that my room looks so red. It looks like something out of Twin Peaks. I don't know why. My lights aren't red, but it just looks super red. So sorry that. Sorry about that.
Thanks.
That's okay, no worries. I was just looking at the questions just about what we were talking about just then. There was a question that came through that said, how do we differentiate between role playing and actually really wanting to be the opposite sex? How do I positively reinforce that it is okay to be who you want to be? So that's same thing with like gender, as you were just saying.
Denise and I have sort of discussed this before, and I've spoken to a few other people sort of in the field that work with sort of gender clinics and things like that. And sorry, one of the sort of takeaway things that they said was role-playing only for a short space of time during playtime, whereas if it's an ongoing insistence and an ongoing and escalating sort of thing that is happening, where they're insisting on having a different name, being called by a different name, or there's sort of ongoing sort of issues with their body, or they don't feel comfortable, or they're sort of avoiding certain things based on, you know, bath time or something like that, or they're saying all the time, I don't like my body, I don't feel right in my body. You know, that's when there could be the potential to sort of talk to a child, a gender, somebody from the gender clinic or somewhere like that, and say, you know, I have a child in my care who is saying these things to me. I'm not too sure. Is it possible to book an appointment? Sometimes booking an appointment can actually be quite a lengthy process. There can be quite a long wait time as well. This is one of the ongoing issues and sort of struggles for people who are questioning their gender, is the long wait times that can be in clinics, no matter where they go. It's not just specific to Australia or Adelaide either. This is sort of a global sort of issue that transgender communities and transgender people are facing trying to access care. But it's really sort of down to an individual sort of thing. And Denise, I don't know if you want to add anything that I've sort of...
Just in some ways, it probably doesn't really matter whether it's just exploration or something ongoing. I mean, if it's just sort of exploration and it goes away again, no harm done. But you'll know if it's sort of a sustained thing. I think either way, it's just really a matter of, and it's really the second half of that question, is just being affirming and supportive. And Eamonn and I were talking about this question earlier, and we were kind of saying, you know, things like maybe there's certain TV shows you can watch with them, and Eamonn's a lot more up on that kind of pop culture than these. So specific examples, or maybe you could go to the Pride March with them, which happens around the same time as the Christmas pageant every year. You know, there's things that you could, you know, when you say you watch the news is on or something comes up or the TV's on, you could kind of say something kind of accepting or affirming about what you see in front of them and conversations you have. So just so they know, you know, without making a big drama of it at that stage, but just so they know that you're cool with that stuff, and so it establishes some kind of idea of safety, I guess. You know, maybe there are certain celebrities or public figures that that you could refer to or speak about, do in a positive way, who are trans or same-sex or what have you. So yeah, there's a few ways you can just sort of generally set up a culture of establishing a sort of a safe space to show that you are aware and accepting of those things generally, just like you might do about some other things like race issues or disability or other things like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I was just going to share an example of, when I was when I was like 4 or 5, I really loved the movie The Little Mermaid. And so I used to pretend to be a mermaid. It didn't mean that I wanted to be Ariel or wanted to, walk around with the shell breastplates and all that sort of stuff, because I really loved swimming. And so for me, the idea of swimming was equated to, if I was a mermaid, I could just swim all the time and I would have so much fun. So there's that role play element. It didn't mean that my gender, I was questioning my gender identity, but it was more that imagination of being a different kind of person. But I didn't question my gender. I was just exploring what it meant to be a mermaid, and just swimming in the pool or going to the beach and just wanting to do that all the time. So that's just kind of like an example of, where somebody might be like, oh, why does he want to be a mermaid? It's not necessarily considered a boy thing to want to be a mermaid when you could be a Power Ranger or one of those sorts of characters. And that sort of leads into sort of the gender stereotypes that we place onto children, which they learned from a very young age. So they'll start learning sort of gender stereotypes and those expectations from like 2 or 3 years old, and they'll learn what will actually get them praise, or what will cause people to sort of have negative reactions to them. So I remember when I used to work in a retail store, down the costume aisle, you'd always see the parents going, no, you don't want to wear that, that's a girl's costume, or no, you shouldn't wear that because that's what boys wear. And so, there was this real sort of expectation of how boys and girls should play, when really all toys are for any kid because they're just playing pretend and they just want to have fun and use their imagination. So I think that's really important as well. Is it's not just about, it's everything that Denise said around positive reinforcement, but also allowing them to just explore what it means to be another character or another person, or be a princess, be a prince, be Wonder Woman, be Iron Man. All those sorts of things are really important, and it shouldn't matter what gender they are. And something that I sort of find, and I can only speak from my experience, I can't speak from anybody else's, is that oftentimes what I would see is little girls would be encouraged to wear Iron Man costumes, but you'd never see a little boy being encouraged to wear an Elsa costume. So there was, this real divide on what was acceptable for a boy or a girl to do, which I thought was really sort of disheartening, because we were telling girls you can do whatever you want, but we were saying boys, no, you can only be this one thing. And that can actually be quite hurtful, because it will stop them from exploring other avenues and other parts of themselves, which could, improve their lives and make them much happier. So I sort of just wanted to say that.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that. Did anyone have any questions about that kind of question that we just spoke about? If you guys wanted, you can put your microphones on, because there's not many people in the session. So feel free to shout out questions when you want as well. Did you want to move on to the next question?
Yeah.
Let's go with, so there's one here about signs and behaviours to look out for if a child is questioning or exploring their sexuality.
Denise, would you like to start?
Okay, I'll start with that one. We were talking about this one, and we said, often it's a bit like when we talk about STIs. there may be no symptoms. And what we mean by that is that often queer people, particularly kids who may have had a trauma background or, you know, lack of security and that kind of thing, will be or actively bullied, but will be really, really wary about letting any clue at all slip out. I mean, some will, but some will really, really hide it. So while in some kids there may be some things, in others you never notice anything. My ex had two daughters. That I helped co-parent for a while. Now one of them has transitioned and is living as a young man, and honestly, not a sign. I didn't notice anything. Her dad, who's a psychiatrist, didn't notice anything. Her mother did. Nobody. She didn't let a hint out. You just could have knocked this over with a feather. So sometimes there is just nothing, and that was her nature. She was a very internalized, secretive sort of kid. She, as she was then, and I guess he, as he is now, I haven't seen him, but I guess he's probably got that same sort of cautious nature. But so yeah, there may be nothing, and even when there is something, it really does depend on the individual. And as Eamonn said, there might be things you might think, oh God, like, this boy wants to dress as a mermaid all day, but he may not be ever questioning his gender. It might be just like, yeah, he loves swimming or whatever, like Eamonn said. And again, I think, I mean, sometimes there's quite overt stuff, particularly around gender. Sometimes they may say they hate their body, or they don't want to wear these clothes, or they don't want this name, and that can be more obvious. Other times they might just try sort of slipping things into a conversation and sort of toss you out or test you out, which is where again that thing comes in of just generally trying to build an open and affirming sort of culture around this stuff. Yeah, so it's unfortunately you can't just reel off, well, you know, there's this and this. It's just not that simple. And then did you want to add some stuff on what we are talking about?
Yeah, I think you sort of really succinctly kind of said it all. You can't ever really truly know until somebody tells you. I mean, I can share my own experiences, and I'm quite comfortable doing that. It's not upsetting or traumatizing for me to share them. I grew up in a country town, and so, you know, culturally, it was sort of not as progressive even as in Adelaide at the time. So, you know, growing up was a very different experience for me. I never really questioned my sexual orientation or anything growing up. You know, I think up until the age of maybe 15, 16, I didn't really find either anybody attractive. I didn't have any sort of, you know, like the people, like all my friends would be going through like all the like music magazines and being like, oh, they're cute. I'd be like, no, don't see it, don't care. I don't understand this. It seems pointless. And then it wasn't until I was like 14, 15, 16 that I kind of started to sort of have some sort of attraction. And, you know, sort of, it was more towards guys. And I was like, what's going on? All my life growing up, I had heard gay slurs, you know, being gay was bad, it was wrong, all those sorts of things that, you know, you don't think children are going to hear or pick up on, but they do. Children are, you know, I'm sure you will know, children are like sponges and they will take on any information that they are around. And so I had taken on all these negative connotations to what it meant to be gay. And so for me, I had a very different experience where I didn't feel safe to come out, even though, you know, my mum was lovely, and, you know, was never in a home environment where I felt threatened or that I could be, you know, on the streets the next day. You know, none of that happened, but I still had that internalized fear that it could happen. It was the fear of what could happen, not if I was going to, but if it could. And so for me, when I started questioning my sexuality and all those sorts of things, I became very angry. I started sort of distancing myself from school. Up until that point, I had sort of been, the A grade student that was at the top of the class, that always did really well. And suddenly I was, almost failing and just disengaged from everything and just doing the bare minimum to get by. And, apparently my mum said that she got called to the school like 6 times in 1 year based on my behaviour at school, and I didn't know this. So, there can be quite different signs that you may not even be aware of. I didn't tell my mum that I was gay until I had moved out of home and had already been living in Adelaide for a year. So I was like 21 when I told her. I told friends that I was gay earlier than that when I still lived in Piri. Sorry, I didn't want to say where I lived. When I still lived in my hometown. And, they were all very friendly and accepting and all that sort of stuff, which did make it easier. But there was still the underlying and sort of that underlying fear of what other people would do or say to me if they knew. And I do have other sorts of experiences based on that fear. But, it's just really important to know that everybody's experience is going to be different. That's my experience. And, my mum just put it all down to me being, a teenage boy going through puberty, and that I was just being difficult for the sake of being difficult. And, it wasn't until I sort of years later we started talking about those sorts of that sort of time of my life that she started to understand what was going on for me. And I do think that she felt bad that I didn't feel like I could trust her. But, in saying that, I had done little things like, what would you do if me or my sister were gay, or brought home somebody of the same sex as a boyfriend or girlfriend? And, I don't think my mum knew how to respond, so she didn't necessarily give the best answers. And so for me, that was a warning sign of, no, you can't come out yet. And so I waited until I had built a safe space for myself. So I think
just on that, with the responses from your mum, for our carers here today, what advice could you give them, or advice you've heard from others that maybe our foster carers could answer to their foster child in a different way to kind of encourage that conversation, being a bit more aware about it now?
Yeah. I think it's just be open about it and just be like, if a foster child was to say, what would you do if one of us, somebody that you looked after turned out to be gay or was trans or something, a good response would be, I would still look after them. I would still want them to stay here. I would want them to feel safe here. I don't want them to go. It's just about the statements that, for however long they may stay with you, whether that's only for a few months or for as long as, they want to, or that they are able to, or can, that they feel safe and validated. And, it may require months of them slowly opening up before they tell you anything. There may already be a history where they are sort of out and they may be having issues at home or something like that. And so it might be in case notes, or, is that a caseworker or something like that they might have?
Social worker, caseworker.
So their caseworker, social worker may ask to disclose some information to you prior to them coming to stay with you or live with you. And it's sort of about, if they're at an age where you can sort of have a bit more of a serious conversation, sort of treating them with respect and having that sort of almost adult kind of conversation where it's, I've been told, depending on how much you'd like to share and how how open they are, and if they're going to be really sort of aggressive or anything, you may wait until they're more comfortable. But just saying, your caseworker, you may just say them by call the caseworker by their name, told me that, this has sort of happened in the past. I just want you to know that you're safe here, or you're welcome to stay here if you want. We aren't going to, this isn't a thing for us that is going to change the way your stay here. It's not going to impact your stay with us. So it's just those sorts of things I think that are going to be the most important. Again, it's going to be an individual approach for every person that you would foster. And I think Janice can also agree that no two people's experiences of coming out or working through their gender identity or sexuality is going to be the same. There'll be similar experiences, but every response will be different, and the way that we respond to other people will be different as well.
Yeah. And then something I want to throw in as a good resource, and it'll be in the document we send round, but I don't know if any of you are handy to Woodville, but at the Shine at Woodville, there is a library which is free to join. Anybody can join it. And it has really, really good books on talking to kids, age-appropriate stuff from tiny kids to older, about a range of stuff around, sexuality, gender, puberty, porn, you name it. There's some really, really good books you can borrow there as well. So there is stuff out there to support you as well.
Yeah. I was going to say, another way that you can be supportive and have those sorts of conversations is maybe start having a new tradition where every year you go to Pride March, even if you're just on the sidelines, on the side of the road waving, just be like, this is what we do every year. You can come if you want. And that way, it's not necessarily we're doing this just for you, but we do it just because we want to. And we want everybody that's staying with us to come along. And then that way, they have the option to come, and they sort of know that they're in a supportive environment where no matter what time of year it is, it's not just about them, but it's about a bigger issue, and it's about, being allies, which is sort of what LGBT people want to know, is that there's going to be allies in different areas and different parts of their life, no matter where they go.
Great, thanks so much. There's just another question here. You may have touched on it a little bit before, but it's, how young will we know, and is it okay to presume? So you did talk a little bit about, young children showing actions, as you said with your personal story about Ariel. Is it okay to presume? Should carers? What's advice with that kind of stuff?
As we said, you might not know at all. And also, the person themselves will know about their gender or their sexual orientation at different stages. It can be as young as around 3 for the gender stuff. As Eamonn said, research shows that kids work out gender stuff by about age 3 often, and gender roles and gender identities and people's responses to that. I've sort of sussed that out by age 3, which is pretty amazing. The sexual orientation stuff, sometimes, I have friends that say to me, I knew when I was 5 that I was gay, or when there was kiss chasing at school, I didn't want to chase the girls, I wanted to chase the other boys, things like that. Then there's, I didn't really realise that I was attracted to women until I was in my 20s, really, and late 20s even. So, there's a book in the Woodville Library that I just mentioned called Dear John, I Love Jane, and that's about women who've been in heterosexual relationships all their lives, and then later in life they're in same-sex relationships, and some of them had always been attracted to women, and there were some who said, never in my life had I been attracted to women, and then, in my 50s or 60s I met, Diane, and that was it, out of nowhere. So it just, unfortunately, as we keep saying, it really does kind of depend on the individual. But you can know when they're very, very young. And again, that's when you might want to start, you know, looking at some good books, some good websites, and then maybe progress things further to more professional support if things seem to be going on or sort of escalating in quality. But I mean, also we talked about, is it okay to, because you're a nurse, so Eamonn, do you want to address that one?
Yeah. Sort of in a nutshell, probably it's not okay to presume, but you could, you know, say, I suspect, but we can't make assumptions. But we can then make sure that we have a supportive environment. So again, it's going back to those things that we, you know, have already talked about, you know, making sure that TV shows are inclusive and, you know, promote diversity, and they don't, you know, there's lots of kids cartoons and new kids TV shows actually have a lot of diversity, and you know, some of them are just queer characters that appear. Some of them might get married in the cartoons. Some of them, it's sort of an underlying storyline that goes through seasons of the show that you never really know is kind of there unless you're looking for it. You know, it's kind of hidden and encoded, and then it's not until you suddenly see it, you're like, oh my God, this was all happening in the background and I didn't even know. And, you know, it's all those sorts of things that can be reaffirming and just sort of, you know, if they're there in everyday life and you're being like, this show's great because it's funny and it's fantastic. And, you know, it's not just because it's got this trans character or this queer character, but the show itself is promoting so many other things. You know, some of those shows are like, some of them aren't airing anymore, but you might be able to find them on Netflix or Stan or Amazon Prime or something like that. You know, Disney just had, I think it was last year, they had their first character in a live action kids TV show actually say, I am gay on the TV show. That was the first character for Disney in their history. And it was 2019. And that was a huge deal. Like, you know, you talk to LGBT people, they'll be like, there are other characters throughout Disney that are gay. Lots of people love to say that lots of Disney villains are you know, are kind of gay. They've got this gay encoding, by the way they're so dramatic or something like that. Just the drama of the villains. Because we just, Amy Duke has asked, what cartoon from, it was a character called Andy Mack. Let me see if I can find it. So it was a Disney show and it was called Andy Mack.
Is that M-A-C or M-A-C-K?
M-A-C-K. So A-N-D-I-M-A-C-K. And I think that has finished now. So it finished last year. But that was sort of one of the it's the first sort of live Disney show to have an openly gay, queer character, however you'd like to describe them. So there's, you know, there's lots of other cartoons and TV shows and movies out there, but, you know, just having all of that there is really important. And you don't have to go out and watch everything now and, you know, look at it all, but it's just knowing that it's out there is really important. You know, even things, there's new cartoons on Netflix like She-Ra, which has been rebooted, and that has a same-sex sort of LGBT theme. The same for Voltron. If you remember Voltron from the 80s, that got rebooted, and that has a gay lead, which, you know, is not even part of the main storyline for that character. It's essentially kind of a minor plot point because there's other more intrinsic values to that character that are important to everybody else around him. So it's nothing, him being gay is actually sort of an afterthought for all of them because he has all these other qualities which they value. So, you know, there's lots of other stuff out there that you can watch. And those cartoons aren't just for little kids. There's older, you know, there's a whole spectrum out there I'll leave it there because I don't want to go over time. We're almost at 8:30.
Yeah, I was just being mindful of time as well. I was even thinking in the resource list that you're creating for us, maybe mentioning some of those TV shows that you just said, because I've already forgotten half of them and I'd love to kind of follow up and watch them. Well, I might end it there for tonight, but I'd just like to thank you all for coming tonight and joining in for our session. It was really good that we could do it, and I'd just like to thank our guest speakers. Thank you so much for being a part of this. Also, adding to the resources, I'm going to add a study that I found that was conducted in England last year about foster carers and children who identify as LGBTQI+. But yeah, I might end it on there. I hope everyone has a really good rest of their night tonight.
Thank you.